Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Who do we have? I always say Skyping, Zoom and Skyping. Who do we have zooming in?
Robert Lamont.
Robert.
Lamont. You may know me as James.
James. Yeah. What is that noise?
Ghost lady.
It's the ghost. This happened a bit last semester too when it got cold. Some of y'all know. It's just the sound. We can't do nothing about it.
We just gotta pretend like we can't hear it. Which is
Sorry, the ghost sound. Jacqueline, I see.
It's going to be about the entire.
Lynette, this is your first Zoom in, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Maybe so. Welcome to Zoom. Andrew, we have you here, right? Jennifer. Is anyone else?
Two Jennifers.
Two Jennifers, yep. And then anyone else?
So anyways, what
Okay, great. Well, hello everyone. I don't know about you, but it's been a week.
Right.
So my plan, my plan for today is to get us done by 9:30. I will really push for that. I'm sure you all can use an extra bit of time in your life. And what we're going to do today is going to be a little bit different. The first part of class, I'm actually going to do a little mini writing workshop where we're going to talk about some strategies and what I noticed, going on in your papers, good, bad, everything. And then we're going to kind of transition to the readings for the week. We'll be led by a couple people who are presenting. Brian's presenting. Robert James is presenting. You prefer James, right?
Robert.
Robert? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Robert. That always gets me confused because Richard goes by Peter. Robert. James goes by. Yeah. Oh, you're all confusing me. But all right, we got two presentations. And then we have some discussion questions from people. My goal for today is, after I do a lot of talking in the beginning, my goal is that hopefully you all discuss. I'm going to try and remove myself from the conversation a bit. I know it's hard. I try and be a mediator between, in-person people, but I think sometimes that makes me talk too much, and I don't want to talk too much. So that's my goal. All right. So one of the things that I thought about for today is that oftentimes by the time you get to actually grad school, master's program or PhD, you often have instructors trying to teach you how to write better by telling you, hey, you didn't do these things, right? And then that's kind of it. I don't know about you, but until specific classes, I never actually had a graduate instructor sit down and teach me how to write. They might have said, hey, you need to do more of this, but we didn't actually work on writing. We just talked about texts. So I want to focus a little bit on writing today. And this is just a quick glimpse, but I hope it'll be helpful. And I do want to ask, what else you have questions about at the end. And if we have other topics we can cover, I'm happy to do that in kind of mini segments with the rest of classes. But so today I want to talk a little bit about how to deal with text, topic sentences, summary, synthesis, and engagement, which we'll talk about that as coming to terms with a text. And that was coined by Joe Harris. And then blending personal narrative and academic, the blending of personal narrative and academic scholarship. Sorry, missed the word there. So these seem like pretty simple things, but the better you do these things, the more advanced your writing will be, the better your papers will be. And if you go on to do a master's thesis or a PhD, a dissertation, comprehensive exams, these, I promise you, are key points. You cannot do well on those things if you don't succeed at these bullet points. I promise you, having been on 595 committees and dissertation committees and comprehensive exams. These are kind of key moments that you need to think about. There's a lot of text on here. I apologize, but we'll work through it. So this is from our syllabus. Most of this is, but I want to kind of break it down for us. So expectations, some of these are implicit and some of these are explicit. So I say I will grade based on expectations for graduate level work and will comment on your papers based on those expectations. Additionally, this course is specifically geared toward learning through composing, meaning we will focus on the disciplinary field of rhetoric and composition or writing studies. Therefore, I expect students to use sources from composition and rhetoric mostly. Making connections to other disciplines is of course allowed and encouraged. However, to fulfill the assignments in this class, you must focus your work on composition and rhetoric or writing studies. Expectations for graduate level writing. Throughout my class, I will ask you to read texts, summarize them, synthesize them, and to contribute your own ideas about making them, making explicit and grounded connections. To do these things, it is imperative that you engage deeply with the text, meaning that you must quote it and cite it. Quoting something 1 or 2 times will not be sufficient for deep engagement with the text. So this is, you know, when I read it out loud, it seems more like a rule book, like you must do these things. But what I mean by it is that these are strategies to help you all get good grades in grad school. Okay, if you can really hone these skills, this is the type of work that across the board graduate instructors want to see. I was speaking with Nicole Ferris in sociology, Malinka Cardona in history, and they all agree with similar things, that they want synthesis, they want summary, they want clear topics. So I think this can translate across disciplines actually when you do graduate level work, when you're thinking about publishing an article. But for those of you who maybe say, well, I just need 18 credit hours to teach, there's real important components to this to other types of work. So for instance, as an instructor kind of outside of colleges, I've had to do memos where I had to synthesize the research I've done for a nonprofit. I've had to write grant proposals for nonprofits or with community members where again I had to synthesize and summarize key work that I was quoting. It wasn't academic scholarship, but I still had to summarize and synthesize well. You also have to write clearly, right? You have to have good topic sentences. So these are kind of transferable skills, I think, across not no matter what you're going to do, but most likely with an English degree, something will include these skills. For my class in particular, the goal with these papers is to string together ideas from the readings and understand how they fit together, how they diverge, how they complicate each other, and more. You are expected to quote, summarize, paraphrase, synthesize in order to make these papers concrete and applicable. That is, these papers should be your space to think through complex ideas, ask questions, and attempt to bring together ideas that will help us think through ideas and maybe even find solutions. So these are some kind of implicit and explicit notes about genre, audience, and expectation. So even though I didn't say all these things, you as grad students and me with my job as an assistant professor, we have to make some assumptions about, good assumptions, I would say, about who our audience might be and the level of kind of professionalism they want or the level of expectation they want. You always want to do more than they expect, right? If right before class, Brian was talking about doing a memo. Do you think he's going to just write a memo with a couple sentences, or is he going to like back it up with some examples, give some sources, say why it's important? Which one are you going to do?
The second.
The second one. Why?
Because I want the memo's recommendations to go through.
Yeah, you want a result, right? Like you want something to occur from it. So some of these are more implicit. They're not, stated anywhere, but I'm stating them now. So first one is, this is a graduate course. Even when you're being personal, you want to make that connection to class. And I say that in my class, but also in your other classes. When you're talking about something in your own life, I care about you all as people, but you also want to show how that connects to what we're talking about, right? Because that shows you that you're not only theorizing, but you're also providing stories. Malia Powell, oh, I don't have it with me, but in the Writing Inquiry book, it's the Eric Pritchard starts with a quote in his book, and it's by Malia Powell, and she says something to the effect of, I'm going to tell you a story, and in this story, I'll give you my experiences. Brian has it. All right. That way you get the full effect. So this is the textbook we use here for 1301 and 1302. And I am quoting from Eric Pritchard's book called Fashioning Lives.
I think it's like 108 or something.
Yep. All right. So Eric Pritchard starts with this, but it's by Malia Powell. She says, this is a story. When I say story, I don't mean for you to think easy. Stories are anything but easy. When I say story, I mean an event in which I try to hold some of the complex shimmering strands of a constellative epistemological space long enough to share them with you. When I say story, I mean theory. And that's her opening address. And so here she's saying constellative, right? These constellations, how things fit together, an epistemological space, so like knowledge-making space about how we share personal experiences of our lives and make a connection, a theoretical connection to them, right? Our stories can absolutely be, if you think of Carmen Kennard, her personal story, her personal narrative is absolutely a theory. It's a theory of a critique of race, right? Or a critique of whiteness in the university, actually. So you can absolutely be personal, but you want to try and move between story and to the theoretical part of it, okay? So when you're being personal, make connections to class. That'll get you more toward the theorizing. And think about how people in our class are doing that, right? The people that many of you have commented on, Asawa Inue's work, Carmen Kennard's work, Ellen Cushman, a lot of them are the people who are using storytelling really, really well. Have a goal or a point to your paper. So this is similar to a thesis. Even if you're just doing a response paper, you still want a goal. You want to say, like, here's the purpose of my paper, or the aim, or the focus, right? That gives me as a reader and your classmates a way to read the paper. It gives us a lens, okay? Let's go back to Brian's memo example. If you don't tell a person within the first maybe paragraph, usually memos have like an executive summary at the beginning where it's like 3 sentences, boom, here's my purpose. And then you kind of give everything else, or you state the problem, right? As soon as they read that, their whole thinking about that subject is filtered through, Brian's addressing the problem of he wants graduate students to be on committees. Okay, let me think about that. And your paper gets read through that lens. So you want that up at the beginning, similar to a thesis. You want to make explicit connections to the readings multiple times. So the goal here is you want to show me you understand them. I believe you understand them, but you got to also show me, okay? You can't just say, Carmen Kennard talks about disciplinary whiteness and problems in universities. Well, okay, yeah, she does, but show me what specifically stands out to you about her text. What sentence? What phrase? Give me those explicit moments, okay? You want to forward their ideas. So show me what you think of the texts and why. What's your takeaway? Can you apply them somehow? Someone, I just read their paper, I can't remember who it was, but did a really good job of applying and saying, oh, now that I've read this, here's what I want to do next in my teaching, right? And there's a very explicit connection. This person made me rethink how I do X, okay? And then we'll talk about this a little bit more, but what are the affordances and limitations of the text? So what good does it do you? Maybe thinking wise, or maybe you hadn't thought about something before. Maybe it's Portillo's article talks about linguistic ableism in a way that lets I'll give you an example of that. Joyce isn't here today, but her dissertation is kind of about how students label themselves, right? So Jay Dolmage's work on labeling and immigrants at Ellis Island being labeled, all of a sudden in her proposal, she was like, oh, that's a historical form of labeling. How could I apply that to my dissertation topic on students labeling themselves? Where does this idea of labeling come from? What are the assumptions with it, right? So like, that's an affordance of Dolmage's text. It allows her to think of labeling in a new historical way, right? Limitations are, you can call out text, like what are they not doing? What are they missing? What do you want more from them? Within reason. If they're providing history and you say, they don't teach me how to use this, well, their goal really wasn't to teach you how to use it. It was to provide a history, right? But you could say, I would love to see someone else provide practical strategies for, whatever it is. So those are the big points, okay? Does anyone have questions about those? Joe Harris, this is a pretty good text. I actually, at Syracuse, I used it for first year writing, but the beauty of writing is that what we teach our first year writing students also works in graduate school and works when you're an assistant professor in writing papers. So it's always good to go back to basics. Joe Harris writes, he says that we should come to terms with texts. And so what he means by that is coming to terms with a text by another writer, then it seems to me that you need to make 3 moves. First, you define the project of the writer in your own terms. You note keywords or passages in the text, and then you assess the uses and limits of this approach. That's similar to the affordances and limitations. Like what can you use out of it and what, is a limit. So can someone maybe in the class, would one of you mind reading this page?
Defining the project of a writer. Who is against shorthand? No one I know. Who wants to be shortchanged? No one I know. So said the New Jersey poet and Dr. William Carlos Williams to another doctor and writer, the psychiatrist Robert Coles. Williams's remark appears in an essay by Coles, Stories and Theories, in which he warns against the damage that can be done when complex views and experiences are reduced to easy labels. And yet, to respond to another text, you have, to summarize it, to respond to another text, you have to summarize it, put key phrasings and ideas in some kind of shorthand. So how do you do that without shortchanging it too? The usual advice is to restate the main idea or thesis of a text.
Such advice imagines a piece of writing as something fixed or static, as an argument that a writer has constructed or a position that she has defended, and which can thus be condensed and reified into something like a thesis statement. But there are many writers who don't so much argue for a single claim or position as think through a complex set of texts and problems. Their books and essays offer not sharply defined positions, but metaphors of movement and growth, or ways of talking about it. Skip a whole line. Ways of talking about a subject. The question to ask of such work draws on metaphors of movement and growth. What issues drive the essay? What ideas does it explore? What lines of inquiry does it develop? To try and to reduce this kind of open-ended text to a single main idea or claim would almost certainly be to shortchange it. Instead, the question to ask is, what is the writer trying to do in this text? What is his or her project? A project is usually something far more complex than a main idea, since it refers not to a single concept, but to a plan of work, to a set of ideas and questions that a writer throws forward. Latin proengicare. The idea of a project thus raises questions of intent. A project is something that a writer is working on and that a text can only imperfectly realize. Of course, any text you write will also hint at possibilities of meaning you had not considered, imply or suggest things you had not planned. A text always says both less and more than its writer intends. To define the project of a writer is thus to push beyond his text, to hazard a view about not only what someone has said, but also what he was trying to accomplish by saying.
All right. So give me a summary of what Joe Harris says about defining a project, the project of a writer. How would you summarize this?
What was the point in writing whatever the text is? What is the author trying to convey?
The whole point might have been to just move a step forward.
It's been cool here the last couple of days.
Even happening in the summertime, you have the door completely open, you got inside out the back.
Writing isn't static.
Here.
Can you hear me? It's Lynette.
Oh, yep, we can hear you.
Writing isn't static, and it's something that we have to think through, not only what are they saying as the writer, but how do we as the reader interpret what they're saying, then ultimately do with it. Because then it's not static, it changes.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not just, here's what this person said, but we're trying to push it forward. Actually, Joe Harris in another chapter, he calls it forwarding. Like, what can you do with someone's text? How do you move it forward? You know, if Matsuda says there's a myth of linguistic homogeneity, well, so what? What can you do to move that forward? I can give you an example. Andrew, I'm going to put you on the spot here, but can you give your example of, you were talking about in your response paper of the Google example? Do you remember that?
Yeah. Let me pull it up. I'm going to have to refresh myself on it.
Oh, hold on one second. We're very low volume. The ghost is back. Okay. Andrew, can you try that again?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Yeah, I heard that ghost. That was pretty interesting.
Just keep talking.
Yeah, okay, just have to
keep
talk
going.
over it. I'm trying to find my paper so that way I can go back over it, because I remember what I was connecting it to, but it would be better if I was looking at the paper so that way I can get back at it. And
Do you remember
whole bit.
who were you connecting it to?
Unfortunately, I don't. I'm sorry. I'd have to look at that paper.
No, that's all right. I shouldn't put you on the spot. But anyway, so I had read Andrew's paper and he was talking about, I can't even remember who you were. Facial recognition. Oh, I think you were talking about Dolmage and Ellis Island, and then you connected that to a new study from Google.
Yep.
Talking about facial recognition and saying, okay, well, historically, here's what happened, but here's how it could be taken up today with modern technology. Here's what the implications of, you know, race and technology are today, right? So moving beyond that historical lens and saying, okay, well, how can you imagine this article affecting people right now, right? Or conversely, like, you can take something and think like, okay, well, you know, if you feel your culture hasn't been analyzed enough and you want to say, okay, this gives me a way to look back at my history, to re-see it from this lens, think about it historically, right? So you can use text a different way and forward them to your own argument. Did you find anything else you want to say, Andrew?
Yeah, I actually found what it was connecting to. So yeah, it was Domage's paper, and essentially what happened was an individual named Sophia Umoja, I think is how it's pronounced. She states in a book, Algorithms of Oppression, that Google search engine was reinforcing oppressive social relationships and enacting new modes of racial profiling. So she was sitting down with her niece and her daughter and her stepdaughter rather, and trying to kind of show them images of black girls and kind of give them a racial profiling and potentially build them up a little bit. And what ended up happening was there was a glitch in Google's system that when you brought up black girls, there was pornography that was brought up, and then there was also association where black individuals were tagged as apes and animals, and that's been fixed since then. But it was just kind of crazy how that connected to Domage's piece, where even people were profiling, and then you have computer systems now profiling people, and it was just a really odd situation. And I felt that was something that connected really well.
Yeah, not only that, but in horrifying ways, right? In obviously ways that technology created by humans then perpetuates this racial inequality and racial bias, right? Horrifically. and this idea of, okay, well, we have what humans have done at Ellis Island, like labeling people, but now what happens in a moment where it's not just humans kind of labeling, but humans creating technology that then further labels, further marginalizes, stereotypes, you know, you get all of those connections in this example, right? So that's one way to kind of think through the implications of a text, how it, I mean, a completely different example, right? We're moving from Ellis Island to modern technology, both being used to perpetuate racial prejudice and just flat out labeling, right? So those are the big points from coming to terms, okay? So what I wanted to do after that is think about, okay, when we're talking about projects, keywords, uses of limits, how to forward this or how to take these ideas up in a certain way, we start a lot of times with topic sentences, right? First sentence in a paragraph usually. What my goal is to make them concrete and make them yours. And I'll explain what that means. But I want us to read these and I want you to evaluate them, all right? Some of these I made up, some of these I took from yours and crafted different things in them. So I didn't put names because I took creative lenience on all of them. All right, first one. In Paul Kai Matsuda's article, he discusses language myths and homogeneity. Is that a good topic sentence?
Kind of vague.
Vague, why?
What language myths and homogeneity in what way?
Yeah.
Are they positive myths? Are they negative? Are they disenfranchising somebody?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not concrete. Do you get who this author is in any sense? You just get who? Well, what? Paul Kimetz. Lynette, what do you think?
I don't think you get who the author is, but at the same time, one of the things I do think the topic sentence does well is that, you know, they do clearly say they're going to talk about, you know, the language myths and homogeny, but I agree, and I'm sorry, I don't know the name of who was just talking, but if they would put in there some sort of adjective with it, that would strengthen it up and tighten the direction of it, with also giving us some insight as to who the author is.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing though, I want to clarify. So that you had said it gives us some sense of the author going to talk about language myths, but as if you are the author, if you, Lynette, are the author, this gives me no sense of what you're going to talk about. It just gives me what Paul Kai Matsuda says. Right?
Okay. Okay.
Do you see that distinction? Like, by starting off with someone else's article, I don't know what you, this isn't your sentence, Lynette, but I'm just saying you, but I don't know what you want to talk about, right? Like, how are you going to take up Matsuda's work? Okay.
It's almost more like a concrete detail, for lack of a better word, instead of a true topic sentence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, let's read another one. The articles this week address the theme of how political systems have used and are currently using language as a source of power to give and take away human rights.
It's more of an overarching, this is what the paper is about. For that to be a paragraph would...
What if it's the beginning paragraph? What if it's the beginning sentence of a paper?
Well, that's what I'm saying. A paragraph, there's not enough space in a paragraph to cover that.
Mm-hmm.
That's... not a great thesis statement, but more like a thesis statement for a whole paper than a topic sentence for a paragraph. If that's all that the paper talked about, then that's, and it's early and it's at near the end of your first paragraph, maybe that's good.
It definitely gives a frame, right?
But
I will do this.
Very, very big one.
Okay. As Ellen Cushman discusses sponsorship in the Cherokee Phoenix, she makes an effort to show that Elias Boudinot achieved a great feat.
Well, that feels like more of a statement than anything, as opposed to like a thesis topic. Like, yeah, you can discuss Ellen Cushman and her connection to Cherokee Phoenix and her effort, but it doesn't really go beyond that. It doesn't show how you're connected to it, what you're presenting, how you plan to take what you learned from that discussion and continue it forward and further it.
Yeah, we don't really have a sense after, if that's the first sentence, we don't have a real idea of what comes in that paragraph. Is it going to be about Ellen Cushman? Is it going to be about Elias Boudinot being successful in some way? We're not really sure, right? What about this one? Portillo's explanation that Ellis Island officials conducted a snapshot diagnosis of immigrants sounds like precisely the situation Kennard describes of the gatekeeping incident in which a university official blocked a minority student's entry to medical school purely on her appearance.
It's a good synthesis sentence to me.
Yes, why is it a good synthesis sentence?
Because they're taking what Portillo says and connecting it to Kennard's and being able to draw a connection between those two different ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. So Portillo and Kennard's pieces are just arbitrarily read in weeks in this class, right? We just happen to read them kind of next to each other. But this person is actually saying, oh, here's a connection from Portillo that makes us think about kind of the snapshot diagnosis and how that can be perpetuated with other people who are not immigrants at Ellis Island, right? Here's the connection. That's not to say that will happen with every article. That's the point of synthesis, is you tell me where the convergences happen or where they diverge, where they move apart from each other, okay? So good synthesis sentence, is it a good topic sentence?
I wouldn't say that that's the first thing you say in a paragraph. It gives too much of a synthesis.
Right, so maybe you would foreground this with something like, I'm putting myself on the spot, but something like the labeling of people has, I'm using passive voice here, don't hate me. The labeling of people has been done historically between immigrants on Ellis Island toward African Americans at university settings today. Something like where you're foregrounding that idea of labeling, right? Or you're foregrounding a topic, a theme, and then you can say, okay, here's my specifics, right? Something that shows, all right, I'm thinking about this historically and currently. I'm thinking about this with different types of bodies, right? Maybe that's it, that labeling happens across bodies, across races, and then you go into your examples. Some kind of topic sentence like that. All right, next one. Where Dolmage uses the term disabled in the literal sense, Portillo extends the concept of disabling the immigrant to another semantic use. Disabling the immigrant linguistically, can't see it, and culturally by forcing the assimilation to Americanism.
I think that could work as a topic sentence because
Why?
you have to. It's kind of sweeping, but like you've identified terms, like you have to flesh out the use of disabled, and then you have to take Dolmage's use of disabled, so a couple sentences highlighting that, and then Portillo, and then revisit that at the end. That connection you outlined in the beginning. I think that would work.
So possibly. It is a good synthesis sentence, right? Because it shows how they are juxtaposed.
I'm tossing between, if it is a good topic sentence, then the connection between the two could be clearer in a shorter sentence before this sentence.
Right. So, I mean, this is a good example of there's not going to be a perfect topic sentence. But what there is you can definitely tell which ones are a little bit stronger as topic sentences, which ones are like, okay, that's passable, right? And some of these I pulled out of middle paragraphs. They aren't actually your all's topic sentence. I pulled these out, some of them, arbitrarily. Robert, were you wanting to talk?
Yes, I was going to say that this sounds like a good conclusive sentence, not a really good topic sentence, because it seems like it's just pulling ideas that have already been presented together. That's what I was going to say.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. But if the paragraph had been talking about their differences, I mean, that could be a conclusion. Where Dolmage uses the term disabled, Portillo extends the concept. Yeah, that could be a conclusion sentence, actually. So it depends on your frame. Like, how are you framing that sentence for readers? Okay, a couple more. Aside from language differences, it is also important to consider other differences that impact student success.
I think that's a decent topic sentence. I just want to know what differences.
If it had a like A, B, and C, it's like a cookie cutter thesis statement.
Yeah. So we do know that we're talking about language differences, and there's this extension to, well, language differences impact something else, right? You can see this as like in the middle of an essay saying, okay, first I talked about this, now let me move to how language differences impact students' success, such as how testing happens, or, you know, whatever, that X, Y, Z, A, B, and C, right? As educators, what can we do to support all our students, not just the ones who speak a more privileged variety of English and who have had access to positive literacy sponsors throughout their lives? So this is a question. What can we do?
I think it's difficult to start a paragraph with a question. I've only seen it done a few times.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I would start a paragraph with that particular question. It's kind of, because then you follow up with some answers or some more questions. I think with that one, you'd want to kind of introduce a little bit of the background first. Tell me if I'm wrong.
There's no right or wrong. This one is purely stylistic. There are people who will love it and there are people who will hate it. I'm fine with questions, as long as you set up a question and then that sets up the statement, right? That sets up your paragraph. But I mean, you're taking a chance on your audience of asking a question. For me, it's fine. But again, you want to think of the audience, think of the genre. Go back to the memo example. In a memo, are you going to say, Dr. Hayes, what would happen if we allowed graduate students on committees?
Imagine a world.
Imagine a world where we let graduate students on committees. What do you think about that, right? Like, there's different moments where it's more appropriate than others. In a response paper, it's okay, typically. All right, when I dissect all the points each author made within their article, there's a consistent theme of culture forming language and literacies.
I think that's an okay topic sentence. Maybe? I don't know.
Okay,
now I'm starting to doubt my abilities. Because they're saying they're going to focus on the theme of culture forming language and literacies. Or I assume
absolutely.
That's what it's going to focus on.
Mm-hmm. So maybe it could be more specific, like when I dissect all the points of each article, author made within their article, like maybe it could be more specific about, well, what points from which authors. When I think about linguistic ableism, snapshot diagnosis, and industrial choreography, there's a consistent theme of culture forming language and literacies and the oppression of marginalized identities, right? Like that all of a sudden becomes more specific rather than just saying all the points each author made, right? Like if you ground it in, when I say ground it in concrete details, that's moving back to, all right, linguistic ableism, and you put in little parentheses, portillo, snapshot diagnosis, dolmage, you kind of put their key phrases into your sentences. And then this last one, racist rhetoric can also find itself within the nationalistic idea of wanting to have English be the national dialect of America.
In a certain paper, right, I have to imagine a bit about it, but in a certain paper, that's a good topic sentence.
Yeah. Why?
Because the assumptions I'm drawing is that you have been writing a paper about racist rhetoric, and then an aspect of it can connect to some readings and nationalisms and things like English only and all of this like raw and like modern stuff. So there's a paper I could put that in a first sentence.
Yeah, absolutely. So key points of topic sentences. So one of the things that I would like you all to do before you turn in your next paper is watch out and look and see if you have too many paragraphs that begin with as so-and-so argues, right? Because what happens is not that it's bad all the time, but all of a sudden if you have 6 paragraphs in your paper or 7, and each one says, as Matsuda argues, as Portillo argues, as Dolmage argues, each topic sentence becomes someone else's and not your own. So all of a sudden I'm reading that paper through what someone else says, not how you're taking it up. Okay? Remember, you want your topic sentences to try and overview your paragraph's main point. That is the point of a topic sentence. Give the main point. Now, when you do things like a dissertation, you're not going to be able to do that for every single paragraph. There's going to be paragraphs that kind of extend multiple paragraphs, right? But for a short 2 to 3 page paper, you can absolutely do that, right? And think of a topic sentence can also be a transitional sentence. Like, another point about linguistic diversity that I want to address is how it affects student success. You're saying this adds on to the last part, but I'm transitioning to a new topic, okay? If you're using sources, remember that you want to explain how you're using them, not just what they say. So you want to think about Joe Harris's limits and affordances, or actually he says uses and limits. So don't just say Carmen Kennard argues this, but does she skillfully argue? Does she argue and you have questions about it? Does she, argue about structures in the university that make you rethink something? Like, try and explain how you're taking it up rather than just rely on Carmen Kennard says this. And then this is a fun activity to do, and I would actually really encourage you to do it with your next response paper because it's so short. If you took all your topic sentences from your paper and you put them together and you just read each topic sentence, would your argument and your views of the readings come across? All right? All of a sudden, if we take these, Haki Matsuda's article, he discusses language myths, and if we take just the topics, if they're not descriptive, you won't really get a sense of what your actual paper is about. Sometimes I look at your topic sentences before I read the paper just to see if I have a sense of what your paper is about. So try it. I would also say, we're going to come back to this, this is a great example of a book review. It doesn't quote much, but it does some really good topic sentence stuff, transition sentences, and it also does some good synthesis work without quoting, more so synthesis, like talking about ideas, how they connect, because it's talking about Literacy, Economy, and Power, which is a book that emerged in response to sponsors of literacy. So it's a bunch of scholars, about 15 scholars, taking up Deborah Brandt's work. So it starts with Deborah Brandt. So let's go ahead and I'll look at a couple sentences. Since the 1980s, Deborah Brandt's work has helped shape the interactions between composition and new literacy studies. Okay, that's very clear, right? We got a time period, we got what it's helped to do.
It's downloading at the bottom.
That one? There we go. Okay, next topic. Those convergences are clearly apparent in the varied concerns of the contributions to the volume, including all these people. Okay, so what do you think is going to happen in that paragraph?
Lay out these convergences.
He's gonna lay out.
Not all of them. It's a short paragraph.
Yep.
But highlight really.
The rhetorical potentials of these trends in composition and literacy studies were notably set out in 2001 in Brandt's Literacies in American Lives, which won a trifecta of awards, blah, blah, blah. What's he talking about there? Rhetorical potentials of the trends in composition and literacy studies. And then here, it's very descriptive topic sentences. Literacy, Economy, and Power is divided into 3 broadly defined sections. The second set of articles includes several that use Brandt's concept of literacy sponsors to develop case studies that include studies of translingual literacies, such as those examined elsewhere in the issue. The second section, right? So you can look at these first sentences and know what's happening in that article. This collection is full of useful theoretical categories, overviewing of shifting trends, thick descriptions of pragmatics of literacy in action, right? So even without that, do you have a sense of what this book is about? Just having read about 6 sentences? You know it's about Deborah Brandt. We know it's about literacy. literacy trends, pragmatics in literacy. Like, that's a lot of information to know from very few sentences. So think about, it's not homework, but I would suggest reading this. One, to think about how Miller is synthesizing, specifically, especially because you'll notice we've read some of these pieces, but here he's talking about Lathan and Brandt and Cushman and Young all in the same paragraph, all right? He's not quoting because it's not a long enough piece for him to quote, I think, 15 authors, but he's referencing their work very concretely. Yeah, so that's my example with that. The other thing I want to talk quickly about, and this will be a lot quicker because I just have one example. So I'm going to ask you, is this a summary or a synthesis? So I'll read it for you. In The Visa Border Labyrinths, Tamara Marco explains that unbeknownst to many individuals in America, many students, professors, and faculty have to deal with the difficult process of applying for visas. This process could also be constituted as racism. Similarly to occurrences at Ellis Island, as many foreigners are being profiled by their names and countries of origin. Due to the Trump administration's anti-immigrant policies and rhetoric impact us daily in a scale and style that perhaps we have not experienced before, misrepresentations of immigrants used to justify these policies have reached a new level of dangerous absurdity. This misrepresentation that our present-day immigrants face sounds unfortunately similar to what was experienced by the individuals coming through Ellis Island. Furthermore, citizens of countries with the most fraught political and economic relationships with the United States and countries with the most impoverished economies and political stability often navigate the fiercest economic, psychological, and emotional costs to apply and sustain their visas, or their visa applications or renewals are simply denied. For example, in the 1990s, when Medellin, Colombia, was considered the most dangerous city in the world based on the highest rate of homicide in the world, citizens of Colombia were among the most denied visa applicants, not just the United States, but anywhere in the world. Summary or synthesis?
Summary.
Why?
It repeats the details from the article. It's
From-
not from
Marco's.
Marco's article. It's telling us what it was about,
Okay.
not how, it doesn't show us how it told us that story.
Mm-hmm. Does this author provide the project of Marco? Remember, the project, we go back to this. The project is what they're trying to do. It's not just the main idea, but it throws forward. It raises questions of intent. Project is something that the text imperfectly realizes. So the intent of Marco and forwarding that, does this do that?
It doesn't really put it in context or why we should care about what the article is saying.
Mm-hmm.
It just says, here's what it says, but not what it necessarily means in the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm. So we have a little summary. What else?
And it's got potential. You bring up Ellis Island, that's where you stick in other articles. How it's the same, how it's different.
Yeah.
It would be easy to take this if this is what you wrote after you read one article.
Yeah.
And then read another one.
So,
Oh, there's Ellis Island, so you just stick that right there. You're already set up for it.
so what you could do, absolutely, this has so much potential for synthesis. You can put, this process could be constituted as racism, similarly to the occurrences at Ellis Island. For instance, Jay Dolmage and Vincent Portillo talk about the labeling that happened at Ellis Island. Dolmage calls a snapshot diagnosis, whereas Portillo calls this linguistic ableism that occurs. Boom,
There,
give your
it's a very
citation.
short step to the type of reading person that Carmen Kennard did with
Right? So it's that integration, when I'm using visuals here, right? This integration of quotes and bringing them together, that's the synthesis, right? There's so many papers that I've commented on that I say, you're so close, but you're not there yet. I see the wheels turning, right? You're thinking of Ellis Island, you're thinking of things, but you haven't explicitly told me. And as a teacher, I only know what you tell me. You can't assume that I know anything. You can't assume that I have read the articles. You can't assume that I know the arguments. You can't, yeah. You're supposed to prove it to me in the text, okay? That's kind of that's what seminar papers are about. But even if you think about like a conference proposal, you can't assume that everyone in the room has read the exact thing that you're talking about. So what you have to do is you have to provide the information for them. I want you all to do that in these papers too, because one, it helps you as writers. I think it helps you contextualize, as Alex said, of like putting this thing into context. But then it also helps you clarify your own ideas. If you say, well, what was Marco trying to do? Am I doing something different if I say she missed out on this opportunity or didn't do this thing? And so with summary and synthesis, here's what I think are good key points to look for. So first of all is, do you set up the author's project with specific examples? And this is to the point where you should be able to say, all right, Marco does this, and almost be able to highlight, okay, here's example 1, here's example 2, and using some of her language, right? So I can't think of Marco's piece right now, but like there's key moments that emerge, right? Key themes, key phrases, key sayings, like bring those up. The one that Deborah Brandt, oh my gosh, everyone who quotes Deborah Brandt says that sponsors are agents, local and concrete, distant and abstract, that suppress, regulate, blah, blah, blah. I can practically recite it because everyone does it. But it's just a genre convention. You do those things when you're telling someone, hey, I'm referencing Deborah Brandt's ideas, and here's what she said. This was her project, right? How are you using quotes? Do you just drop them in there? Or are you doing what some people call the quote sandwich? Do you introduce it, quote it, cite it, and then follow it up with, so what? Why do I need to know this? All right? That is a really simple way to do it, but it always works. Because then you're saying, all right, in Tam Marco's article, you know, she's talking about the difficulties of visa processing and the mental and emotional implications, as well as the vulnerability about crossing borders. For instance, she writes, quote, 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 cite it. Here's why it's important, because this also makes me think about the current administration, blah, 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 right? Or whatever you want to say. Do you specifically say how author ideas come together and diverge? So this is the synthesis. We see Ellis Island here. We don't see Dolmage. We don't see Portillo. We don't see what about Ellis Island specifically from Dolmage or from Portillo. We just see Ellis Island. Right? Make the connections. Think of me as the laziest reader ever. I don't want to search for something. I don't want to do anything. I just want to read your paper and know everything. Right? No, that's a bad example. But you need to make your reader, actually this is a really good thing. So a couple, like last year in this project I do, it's called the Best of Rhetoric and Composition Journals, there was an article by Eileen Camfield, and they talk about everyone having, it's like a pot of gold with money, and they're like, everyone reading has a fund of attention, and each sentence of the paper either adds to that fund, like you're putting in money into your bank being your head, your knowledge, or you're taking away money, right? Every single sentence that I read after reading hundreds of papers, you all are teachers, right? Many of you. Every sentence either takes out like of my fund of attention, right? Or it contributes to it and you get excited and energized, right? So think of each one of these sentences and think about your reader. Is it taken away from their attention because they have to ask questions like, well, who is this person referencing when they're saying Ellis Island? Oh, okay, it could be Dolman, it could be Portillo. I got to do a lot of work. That's taking away from my fund of attention on the paper itself and making me think of other things. But then when there's like this idea of, you know, really strong moments, that's where I'm like, oh, I'm excited, I'm energized. All of a sudden, the brain bank is coming back, right? Do you all feel that when you're reading papers? Your attention wanes on some, right? So think of that with your audience. You always want to gain their attention. You want to put funds into their bank, into their knowledge bank. Just for fun, I'll share that article with you because it's actually about peer review, and it's a really good article. I've never thought of that before, but one of the things they ask students to do in peer review is actually on each sentence, if your attention grows, put a plus mark and a minus for the ones. If you think about doing that to someone else's paper, it could be pretty harsh, but also it tells you exactly the sentences that you're like energized about, or, you know, like, this doesn't do so well. Okay, so last one is, are you quoting your sources and specifically providing an example from the text? There's no way to do well in graduate school if you don't quote and give specific examples. If you're reading a book in literature, you need to give the example. You need to talk about your character, describe it, right? If you're saying William Carlos Williams says this, you got to quote from it, right? If you're reading a piece by Virginia Woolf and you say that she disrupts the binary of male and female, okay, well, where? Give me a page number. Give me a specific moment. Give me an example from what book or which 10 books with Virginia Woolf, right? So I want those specifics. So with that being said, I really want, I do not like penalizing people. I don't like, you know, so I want everyone, I'm happy to, you know, help in any way, but I want to give you more time so you can look at these papers and really, really make them good, all right? So I'm having a response paper due by October 30th for whatever group you're in. If you've already turned it in, you're welcome to revise it. A couple people have turned it in way early. And again, use this as practice, because this is something I've been talking about with multiple professors here. We've all been saying, hey, I noticed like these things come up. And this is something that even people who do it well need a reminder. I personally, an article that I just turned in, I went through my paper and I was like, look at those topic sentences. And I had to cut so many, you wouldn't believe it. I was like, man, I said in so-and-so's article they did this, and I had to revise. So it's not something that you just stop doing. It's something you have to make a conscientious effort to go back and look at and reflect in your own writing. So these are kind of the steps to do that, okay? Does anyone have other questions? All right, let's go ahead and take a couple-minute break then, and then we will come back and have Brian's presentation and then Robert's presentation. I'm gonna load them up because I don't have yours loaded yet, I don't think.
Yes, thank you.
Do you have your presentation on a flash drive?
Well, no, it's static images. You know, I can log into the site through,
Yeah, let's do that because I didn't upload all the.
Because that way it'll move. I can do it right from there. You don't have to log out.
Yeah, that sounds good. And then.
Hi, I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi, it's me. I don't have any grades. Is that right? Or right? Because I don't have.
Let me check. Okay. Sometimes what happens when I write them, I have to like make them visible or publish, and I know I haven't gotten through everyone, but I've gotten through almost everyone's like pretty close. So I'll check on yours. Can you send me an email now just so I remember to check?
Yep. I will do it right now. I just wanted to make sure because we were talking about it and I thought I'd better ask.
I do have a couple more people's, but between the Making Connections article and the response paper, I've graded almost everyone I have, but I have like, I want to say like 7 left out of 50 some papers. So.
Oh my goodness. Wow, that seems like a lot. Okay, thank you.
That's why it takes me forever.
I'm not upset. I just wanted to like double check and make sure that I hadn't missed something.
No, definitely double check because I'm very close to being done. So I can either tell you like, hey, you unfortunately are one of the few I haven't graded, or I can tell you, but all the ones that I have turned in, I will be done with this week. Like I'm
Okay.
making moves. Making moves with those grades.
Thank you.
Yes.
On these response papers, I guess I thought they were a little bit more laid back, kind of, you know. But do you care what the intro is? Because I looked, and on the next one I'm about to turn in, I just jump right into the author. Like, that's the very first thing I say. Do you want more of like an intro and a closing, or?
Well, so I would say that they still can be laid back, right? Like they don't have, but there's a way of being laid back and still doing the work that I think that's the balance, right? I want you to be able to say, I have questions about these ideas. So ask questions. If you're actually thinking something through and saying, I'm not sure how to take up Dolmage's work, then you can say that. That's perfectly fine. But you also need to tell me that here's what I do understand about Dolmage. Right? Does that make sense?
Yes. So, but do you want like an introduction that's just like whatever, or is it okay to just jump right in? I guess is what I'm asking.
I want an introduction in the sense of I want you to frame what I'm reading. It doesn't have to be a classic introduction of like, in this paper, I will argue blah, blah, blah. But like, there's some kind of introduction that you can say throughout the readings this week. I keep coming back to questions of how do we enact the strategies that people keep talking about? Like, what do we do? That's an introduction, but it's asking a question too. Does that make sense?
Yes. So in that case,
way,
basically for my second response, I just started mentioning author names. So that's worth revising then, to go ahead and get an intro in.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So what is it that, basically what I'm looking for in an intro is, what do you, Jennifer, think about the readings this week? If what's exciting to you is that you can connect it to your personal teaching, then tell me that. If it's that you are confused at how the readings, teach us something about transnationalism, tell me that. If it's, wow, I've read all these things and my mind is blown, I still don't know what to do with it, then that can be part of your intro, but it still gives me a framework to read the paper.
Impossible to offend, just very easy to disappoint.
I would think about it like a blog, right? Blogs can be informal, blogs can be personal, but they're also, if you read a good blog, it still has examples, it still has research, and it still has kind of the intro and the conclusion, but in a thought-provoking, more informal way. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Oh man. Quick disclaimer, if you're watching this in the future with your small children, ask them to leave the room because there's a 4-letter word in the title of the article. So saying it a couple of times is unavoidable. Right? I can't confirm or deny that I picked this article solely on the title. So we should be good. I gotta edit it. I go to the first. No. We've been through this. Yes. Okay. You don't know how to say the author's last name, do you? It's D-I-C-H. I was just gonna say Deitch.
I don't know how to say it.
Because the author gives you this is how you pronounce no, the Vietnamese subject of the author. So I know I'm saying that right, but didn't think to say, here, by the way, here's how you say my name.
Yeah.
All right. Articles entitled #FuckCommunism, Embodied Rhetoric in the Vietnamese Transnational Digital Practice. Summary of the article. Lindish's research question is, what will compel a person to tattoo #FuckCommunism on their body after encountering the social media imagery of Vietnamese rapper and activist No? Deitch traces the means by which a body can be a text, including the ways a body is read by nationality, and furthers that notion with the writing one can put on their own body, complicating that reading. Hip-hop music, borrowed from America, is used by No to highlight the injustice of the Vietnam government and fight in nonviolent fashion for equality and freedom.
No has adopted social media tactics seen in other activist movements and adopted the imagery of a zombie to criticize the passivity of those not resisting while simultaneously rallying those who are, highlighting the rhetoric of images. The movement of people, No, and music and imagery messages across digital space and literal national boundaries deepens Deish's discussion of transnationalism, and the body as text and image as meaning constructs aid in deepening notions of literacy. And this is a picture not of No, but in working with the free version of the software, it was the only neck tattoo I could find, because it's the hashtag fuck is literally across his neck. If you read the article and the pictures, you'll see that. Keywords. I looked at this from a couple different perspectives. If you were looking for this just in terms of literacy, it would be literacy, digital literacy, social media literacy. If you were interested in Deborah Brandt type scholarship or dealing with 1301, if you were going to work this into 1301, these would be the keywords that might be useful in that context. If you were doing a more maybe grad level rhetoric and composition paper, you would look at activist rhetoric, embodied rhetoric, protest, and transnationalism. And then just from a general studies, like if you were noodling around JSTOR and not focusing on a specific set of journals, this might pop up if you're dealing with images, music, or pop culture. So 3 quotes that lets the article put itself in its own words. The first one, digital technologies and representations afford visibility not just for emerging global youth, but also for populations that may not have had previous ways of being seen within their own countries and or on a global scale. I went with this one because it's not anything I wrote about in the paper. This rhetoric of visibility, disenfranchised, we might see, underrepresented, visibility of young people being a theme of the music used and the people discussed and activism, but there were just too many topics in this to hit them all. So this I pulled out right because this is one I didn't address in the paper at all. Second quote, what is most striking about the zombie image word, which is why I picked this, we'll go back to that in a minute, image word, is in its, no, why would you do that? Because I highlighted? All right, I'll do it again. Is in its rhetorical complexity to both critique against passivity and to agitate for awareness. In this quote, the quote being No's in the article, No relates brainwashing to the people's living conditions that maintain their zombie-like complacency. Yet to become aware is also to recognize one's culpability in contributing to the collective's acquiescence of what No sees as authoritarian rule. Awareness is a move to become responsible for one's apathy that has helped create the current situation. That's a mouthful. Why this is important is because, and when we talk about images on the next slide, when we make direct connections, is because a zombie, looking at an image as an image word, which is what I tried to highlight when it got mad, was there's a dual reading of the symbol, right? The zombie can be a rallying cry for people. Like you are, the lyrics from the song along the lines, if the translation is accurate, are you are being a zombie by not rising up and not protesting this thing. And then the people who are going to rally behind the imagery that kind of reminds them of where they were and helps spread a message to other people. So it rallies people by making a connection to the image, but also becomes a self-identifying image once you're in the group that protests. I see nodding, so that's sort of clear. Good. And then the third quote is from No directly. Thanks to rap music, hip hop, and authentic rappers that have always been a mirror for me to follow. I used to feel too street and clumsy, covered in tattoos, and no one had taken my voice seriously until I realized the true power of rap music. If black people use rap music to claim racial equality, I would like to borrow their rap music tactics for nonviolent struggle for human rights for the people of Vietnam. Just because I think it's useful to hear from the subject of the article why they're doing what they're doing. Connections to things that we've read. The subheading, Richardson and Ragland is the clearest connection because from my perspective, I first heard about Twitter and Twitter activism, not in a disparaging like armchair quarterback, but Twitter activism, the first time I ever remember hearing it was during the Arab Spring. And it was a way to circumvent barriers to communication. It was a way to rally people on a short term, like we're going to meet here in an hour, not we're going to plan to meet here in next week. So, you know, police could be in place to shut down a protest. It's a way around things. They talk, Richardson and Ragland talk about specifically their hashtag and their movements being a critique of the state in and of itself, because it's about, I mean, Black Lives Matter started because of police shootings. So by critiquing the police, you're by default critiquing the state for which they work and the state sanctioned murder of people based on, you know, we would say rhetorical reading of their bodies, the way they look, which No would be victim to himself. There's an early in the Beach article, it talks about how Asian American students are more likely on campus to be asked if where are you from, or they're singled out almost to a group as not belonging, which is also why canard is up here, their body being read along racial lines. What I try to argue is that by putting a tattoo, a provocative tattoo, a political message on your neck, even in America where tattoos are more common, the face and the neck is still like almost a bridge too far. And a lot of people will say something like, oh, do you regret that? Or right, it's already something, a mistake that you've made, or certainly in a year or two, you're gonna regret that decision, let alone just right on the neck here. But I did mention Brant, and I wanted to try and expand this notion of sponsorship using No as an example. The government of Vietnam wanted to restrict access to things like the internet, like what people could read and how they could communicate. So that was clearly a negative sponsor. He then travels to America to study, but before that, he had a friend who was teaching him how to get around firewalls the government had in place and giving him bootleg copies of rap music. So this was another sponsorship that was in direct conflict with his government. But then he moved to America to study, and this is when his activism really started to pick up. This is when he started really having the social media presence that prompted the article in the first place. So I wanted to look at it as now his two countries, the country he came from and the country he's protesting in. He's protesting his home country from another country, and at that point it's almost like his national sponsors are in conflict with each other. In one sense, if you were to say there's a rap star that I really like and his whole message is against communism, that's going to fly really well in America, because as America, see the Red Scare, communism bad. So when you pitch him that way, especially with there's a rap star that's against right? Now that works in America, but in the home country, that's a political critique. So I wanted to hopefully expand that. Canard we talked about. And Lori Grease, is it Grease?
Yeah.
She's got this article I had actually read for Dr. Carter's test. I present on this tomorrow about the Obama Hope posters. And it talks about how they have been digitally remixed. So like they'll come down and they'll be changed, Hope changed to Nope, or like different languages they'll dress, or El Presidente and stuff. There's the evolution through digital media of how this symbol almost like became an image. In the beginning of the article, Not From This Class, she talks about the Mona Lisa, Rosie the Riveter, and Uncle Sam being icons that have been adopted for purposes other than their original intent, which is, I think, a good way to look at the zombie imagery, because in America specifically, like, zombies are everywhere. But to think of a zombie as a rallying cry for protest against the government, it's as close to breaking a cliche of something that tired as I've been able to see in a while. And then in conclusion, this is a large chunk of my written paper conclusion, so we can dissect that at the end if you want to. With so many rhetorical issues at play in Deish's article, it was a struggle to shine a light on all of them. The salient takeaway is that the body can be a text, and that text can be used to voice a protest, online and across national lines. The circulating and layered literacies of No's body, lyrics, images, and the interconnectedness of them can illustrate any number of concepts from rhetoric and composition. And since No himself has moved across national borders, and his movement, I know, does still in different directions, No himself can illustrate globalism. Questions, comments, concerns?
Yes.
Go.
You mentioned that your early memories of Twitter had to do with the Arab Spring.
My knowledge of it being a protest tool.
Okay.
Yes.
I didn't know that. So when was? Because from my understanding, there's several movements in the Arab Spring. What time period are you talking about?
2010.
Okay. Because
is what I want to say is when I remember first being, that's when it became, and I'm not saying I was aware of it, as I was following people who were in, that's when it made national news. That's when it started being covered in America, at least in the outlets I was familiar with, were saying, look what Twitter is doing.
Yeah. The earliest version of Arab Spring that I know is like the early 2000s and even some of the late 1990s.
So it would have been using very different digital delivery methods, but it's still.
I didn't know that even now, like Twitter was used even that early
for that specific purpose, because when you're and in Vietnam, they would do a similar thing, which is another thing that's in the paper but didn't make it to the presentation, was the way that the same kind of crackdown that the Vietnam government would have done would have been against things like Twitter. And by making his message start with a hashtag, like that's a nod to the exact type of technology he wouldn't have been able to use. And it's so dangerous because it'll be, you put out there, we're going to meet here in an hour. You can't mobilize the forces to shut that protest down that fast. You just can't. Enough people are going to be there for it to be a thing. And they talk in the article about the efficacy of this, and they seem to imply, it's unquantifiable. Like you can't know for sure how many people go to these protests on those specific word. So it's a bridge too far to say that this particular example is the model of how to do it, how to inspire activism through, transnational activism through Twitter or through Facebook or through digital means. Not because it doesn't work, but because we don't know how well it works. Nobody can put numbers on that and say this particular protest in Vietnam wouldn't have been as big as it was if it wasn't for no pushing it.
But something like the Arab Spring, we do know from Twitter just how, maybe not numbers wise, but we know for a fact that the way protests happen was pretty much through Twitter, because almost all other media modes of like communication were kind of being shut down, where people like Twitter was that kind of, all right, pop up, let's go to this place. And that was really like how the Arab Spring actually the protests emerged.
You made me think of the Velvet Revolution from a previous presentation. There's a paper there, if whoever did that presentation wants to write it, between sort of nonviolent people gathering.
It was me. I wrote that.
Oh,
thank you for connecting.
Woo! There you go. Write that down.
I'm writing it down right now.
Oh, wow. Look what I did.
Any other questions or comments about this article?
I've got something. I thought it was kind of interesting. I don't know if we really got into it, but there was a quote, a couple of them actually, that I really enjoyed and made me think about what's kind of going on in our world right now. So the quote was, "The history of human rights can be told as a history of selective and differential visibility, which has positioned certain bodies, populations, and nations as objects of recognition and granted others the power and means to look at and to corner recognition. As this history suggests, struggles for recognition are also struggles for visibility." And this immediately, when I read this, it automatically made me think of what's going on in Hong Kong.
Yes.
There's a lot of stifling of visibility in all over social media. A big one, from what I've been gathering, is the gaming industry. A lot of people, or a lot of the gamers out in Hong Kong and China, are trying to speak out against what's going on, and they're all being shut down and shunned and being essentially gagged from being able to speak about what's going on. And then a little bit further down the article, there's a quote that states, "The U.S.'s ubiquitous rhetoric championing freedom for individual rights becomes a nose comparative point for Vietnam's limitations against individuals." And this kind of brought up another image that I saw from Hong Kong, where somebody had written in graffiti, "Give me liberty or give me death." And I just thought that was kind of crazy how this is now playing itself out in Hong Kong.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with regards to this article, there's in the beginning when he's setting up, sort of being read around national lines, he talks about Filipinx, which is like Latinx, being identified as service workers, or basically the entire American perspective of Vietnamese people is in relation to a war. And we don't really, as a country, see Vietnamese people as having any autonomy of their own. We only see them in relation to a war we fought. So if somebody were to get out of Hong Kong and come to America and do this, it would be almost the exact same situation that No fled was crackdowns. The zombie would have been prompted to remind people about starvation in camps. I think re-education camps was the phrase that they used in the article. But the kind of violence that the government was doing to the people, and I think it's a very short step to say that that's happening right now in Hong Kong. I had seen the other day, I don't know how it panned out, but I believe they started shooting. I believe a person was shot in the chest during a, so that line did get crossed. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, someone was shot. I don't know if they have died, but they were in the hospital.
Yeah.
Critical condition. And it's been a couple of days since I heard that.
Yeah, I haven't heard an update, just that it happened.
Yeah.
Because that's the precise type of thing they would want to clamp that down. If there's a, and this is gonna sound, I know how this is gonna sound, but if there's a body and the government was responsible, they will go to great. We did that. They didn't want, when Iraq War started, they didn't want photographs of caskets returning home, and they didn't want that body count to go over, I want to say it was 3,000. There was some arbitrary number that they suppressed reporting to keep it under. In the Hong Kong case, I think one would be enough for the outcry to reach some, because we're not talking about it as anything that we have any kind of stake in, and a lot of that has to do with things. I don't think you want me up here for an hour, so that's all I'll say.
Thank you, Brian. Any other questions or comments in general about this article?
Okay.
So, leave it up there, actually.
Okay.
A couple things I want to say about it. One, I think this article provides an interesting, right? So last week I had you all say, like, you know, what could you do? What steps can you take? I think this provides us more than maybe any other article, an interesting step, right? I'm not expecting that each one of you is going to be like, no, but there are different types of steps depending on what people want to do. Different types of steps depending on what people want to do. Not everyone's going to be a teacher. Not everyone's going to change a curriculum. Not everyone's going to change a syllabus. But there's ways to kind of think about transnational literacies and activist work from our class. And I think this gives us an example of how, like, people and their physical bodies can impact that perception across borders. I'm patting my past self on my back because I didn't mean to do this, but it turns out that next week I'll be gone for a conference, so we're not going to discuss the articles till the following week, but your readings for next week are actually some of the readings that come up in this article. So Wendy Hesford, the quote that Andrew read, Wendy Hesford has a book, really fantastic book. If you found this article interesting, and like the way that it's talking about bodies and like viewing bodies and kind of human rights, Wendy Hesford's work might be interesting. It's called Spectacular Rhetorics, Human Rights Visions, Recognitions, and Feminisms. So this book is really great, but what we're reading next week is a piece by Wendy Hesford and Eileen Shell, which is about transnational feminism. We're also reading someone else who was quoted in that piece, Mary Queen, and Queen coins the term, I think she coins the term, rhetorical genealogy. This idea of how things move kind of in digital spaces and across borders digitally. So next week we'll read Hesford and Shell's, it's their introduction, Mary Queen's article, and then one more article, I think maybe by Rebecca Dingo. Is that one? Yeah. And they're all talking about implications like in the world outside of academia. Dingo discusses, I think this is in her article, but her book definitely discusses like the World Bank and like institutions of power that, you know, affect our daily lives, and how the language used in those documents moves across spaces, and how it moves across like audiences, and how it's shaped by our readings of it. You'll see when you read her work, it's really interesting, but she kind of tracks those documents. So I think it'll be a good transition from this week. Let's move to Robert. Do you want to talk about your presentation a little bit?
Sure.
I need to. Can you log into my Leo?
Can I?
For me, maybe. So we can get it. Yeah, because if I log in, it'll show the.
Well, I'm already. Do you want each?
On here.
Oh,
Yeah,
on
yeah.
here. Oh, let me log out of here.
Because it'll
so it doesn't say.
show faculty view. I don't know how to
That's
get to
okay.
the thing that you all see.
Well, good evening. While they're making the next 60 seconds, we have technical difficulties, but I will be talking about my article. No problem.
Yeah, tell us.
I was given the pleasure of reading Decolonial Potential in a Multilingual First-Year course by Cruz Medina. It was really, really an awesome article. I like what he said. I think I will be able to use it if my final project is approved. And so do you want me to go ahead and start talking about it, or?
Yeah, go ahead and start talking.
Cool. One of the ways I'd like to begin is renowned Duke University professor Walter Mignolo, I think is the way we pronounce his name. He basically defined decolonial education as an expression of the changing geopolitics of knowledge whereby the modern epistemological framework for knowing and understanding the world is no longer interpreted as universal and unbound by historical, and biographical context. It used to be where students would think, I think, therefore I am, and now it becomes I am where I think, in the body and geopolitics of modern world system. It's very important to understand this because decolonial is in the title of this article, and so I wanted to make sure that that term was identified. And so one of the things I like about Medina's research is he begins with a study of how multilingual students learn from monolingual ideology within their education, which undermines their abilities to communicate, make meaning, and be effective writers. And it got me to think a lot about my students, especially our LEP population at Wilmer Hutchins in Dallas. And we have a lot of teachers in this class and that teach in Dallas ISD. And to see the mix, my campus is about 53% African American, 41% Hispanic, and the rest, other ethnicities. And so what this got me to thinking is, wow, my students who are multilingual, they're probably thinking in another language register than English. And so this is why this is really exciting to me to read this article and to read about this research. The interesting thing about this research is it took place in Silicon Valley at a private school that was a Jesuit Catholic university. And so here's you see there that upper left-hand corner. I love that, I think therefore I am becomes I am where I think. And I love that. And one thing another thing I like about this article is the way that Medina uses this translingual theory. And I put up a video that I found on YouTube tonight before this class that y'all may want to go to and watch, because I think you really understand what translingual is all about. And here's him talking here in the bottom left-hand corner. He says, after examining these literacy narratives that the students wrote, Medina himself, recognized students had used translingual theories we discussed in class to conceptualize their multilingual struggles, not as obstacles that they had overcome, but as advantages they could use to create new meanings and discover new knowledge. I thought that was fascinating, because what they're doing is they're being able, this is a bilingual, I'm sorry, I should have explained this in the beginning. This is a bilingual Spanish-English course that the faculty of the English department had decided to allow students to be part of. Now, their second language, their second language was English. A lot of them was Spanish, and they were various levels of Spanish proficiency. That was important to know. So in many ways, the course, Medina continues to say, in many ways, the course was answering Ellen Cushman's language-based decolonial question: how can teachers and scholars move beyond the presumption that English is the only language of knowledge, making, and learning? And, I really want to thank, our professor for really opening my eyes, being a white male English teacher that never really thought more about the whiteness of our curriculum and how we conceptualize it. Well, English is always obviously the most important language, because that's the language that we speak here, and it's really not. And so this class has really been eye-opening for me, and allowing me to visualize myself as, can I become a better teacher? I just finished my 25th year teaching, and can I become a better teacher by allowing my students, no matter what color, race, or culture they come to my room in, can I allow them to be better and more proficient in voicing who they are and what they are all about? And my open-ended questions are always open to dialogue. We were reading Things Fall Apart a couple of weeks ago, and two best friends got into a huge argument and about one of the main characters and whether he was a good man or a bad man and things like that. And just allowing them to voice their opinion and be themselves was one thing that I think this whole concept of this article is all about. And so here's the tie-in. We had the article that, let me look at her. I'm sorry, let me look at my notes here. Margaret Flowers, I believe. Catherine Flowers, I'm sorry. Resisting and rewriting English-only policies, navigating multilingual, racial, linguistic, and translingual approaches in language advocacy. She was basically talking about how communication is translingual, multilingual, and has economic consequences, and language cannot be separated from race in the United States. And that's so true. It's such a poignant point. And it really was brought out through this research. And this is kind of what I brought together. Medina has shown how students can learn bilingually and overcome obstacles in second language acquisition. And here, whether that second language acquisition was English or Spanish. Using translingual practices allows a sound pedagogical intervention that tends to restructure the dialogue of linguistic differences within a classroom and coming to a complete understanding of how colonization truly affects the self-perceptions that students perceive about their own writing. And the whole concept behind this research project was, can students, if they're able to work in the language that they feel most comfortable in, can they still present good writing and really good thinking skills and develop those? And I believe that the final outcome is that this translingual practices, they provided the pedagogical intervention that increase understanding and knowledge at the same time. And so what I want to do is I want to use more of this translingual teaching methodology to increase my capability of how I teach my students in the near future. And I just thought it was really great because next year I'll be transitioning to teaching the first year courses for English to my E-Tech students. And so I thought that this was a really, really great approach for me to be able to integrate it into my classroom. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you. That I really one of the things before we open it up to questions, I really appreciate the way that you're kind of, I think one of the hard things about classes like this is that I think a lot of the text that I'm giving you all, it might be the first time you read something like this, and in some ways it's so hard because teaching's personal, right? Like any one of us who is a teacher, myself included, we take it personally. If you get those evaluations and they say something goes wrong, or like, this was the worst class ever, this teacher is horrible, and you take it personally because it is personal.
Yes, ma'am.
Right? So to even read articles that might suggest you're doing something wrong or maybe not as good as you could or whatever, that's hard. It's hard to reflect on those moments. But I think that's what I'm hoping that this class does, is provides us a space to think through that in a generous way of like, these are very real issues, and we can't just say, well, it's okay that, we, perpetuate kind of a white curriculum, right? It's not okay.
Right.
But
it's right.
We can do something about it if we first recognize it, right? Like it's multiple steps. And so even to understand that or to make those connections, myself included, it's like, all right, now that we know this thing, how do we act on it, right? And so I appreciate you kind of talking through that.
Thank you.
So what questions you have or comments about Robert's presentation or Cruz Medina's article in general?
Robert, the point that you brought out about how Medina, this lower left quote, I was looking through my notes after you were pointing it out, because that's one of the quotes that I really connected to, because this entire article, after reading it, I wanted to take it and then just send it to everybody that I worked with.
Right.
It's one of those. Yeah. It's one of those stories that we all, like as teachers, we work with these students, and it's a story that we should be able to share. Like, this is a concrete example of what we see. And it's him explaining it, and I completely connect with what you were saying. And it's really interesting. He even in the article, he even explains that there are other countries that deal with this issue, and that's been something that's been on my mind as well, because he says that every language, I don't have the quote, but every language experiences a superior language, an academic language, and like, because there's other dialects.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that this one really pointed out to me as well. It was, so me and you are on the same page.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So one of the things that I was thinking about as you both were talking, though, is, right, so when I asked you all what steps you can take, now, we can't guarantee that your colleagues will read it, but you can send it. And what if those colleagues read it? And what if you have a discussion about it, right? It's a lot of what ifs, but there's like, if you want to make changes, you have to do some steps, right? So if they don't know about the article, they're not going to read it. At least if they have it, you could say, hey, I want to send you an article, like, see what your thoughts are. Maybe one person reads it, but that's one more person that maybe then can make a change. Like, I think there's these incremental changes, right? We see in Missy Watson and Rachel Shapiro's piece, I have to say Missy and Watson are friends of mine from Syracuse. But they're talking about an incremental change, and then Legia Mihut is talking about another incremental change, right? We have student learning outcomes, okay, and then we're going to student learning outcomes that inform a syllabus. What Legia did, and I can tell you this because she's a colleague of mine, she posted on Facebook, hey, I'm thinking about this idea. I want to talk about having a linguistic pluralism statement in my syllabus. What do you all think? And she crowdsourced it. And then on Facebook, people were like, I want to put that in my syllabus too. So her maybe 200, 500, I don't know how many friends, but say 200 friends on Facebook saw this. All of a sudden, that shaped what they put on their syllabi. Granted, it was probably people in Comp Ret who were maybe had an affinity toward those ideas, but it doesn't mean that they were thinking about like translingualism in their classroom before that, right? And then all of a sudden they're doing that. And then those students are reading a statement on a syllabus that says, hey, we're okay with, cultural diversity and translingualism and all this. Like those, I want us to think about those moments as being steps, because Legia she didn't set out to actually write that article. That article happened because of this process, and then she was like, I should write an article about it. And I actually saw that happen in real time.
Wow.
In the past couple years. And there's still like conversation of people revising her statement saying, oh, I want to do this with it.
That's cool.
That's cool. Did someone? Yeah.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing that I have learned, I guess it's been an eye-opening experience since last week when we decided that this week, when we decided that our novel for this 6 weeks is going to be The Hate You Give.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And it's showing me that realistically, a lot of our African-American students come to us with a second language as well. And they love this book. And my other students love this book because it's something they can relate with. And and so it's kind of eye-opening to me as well, because I'm an older guy, and so Tupac is a big character in this book. And when I first started teaching, I was like, oh wow, what that guy? He's terrible. Da 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 da. But to see it from their perspective, he's given me a different light, and it's kind of educated me. And so that's another area of my life and my brain that I need in my heart. Really, I need to open up to my students and allow their language to be, poetically flow, and to allow them to glean from their experiences and enhance the learning experience as well. And I think that was just that was a really cool experience for me.
I think one of the things that you're making me think about, and one of the things that I struggle with. So I will say very, very honestly, I have many people in my family who disagree politically with me, disagree ideologically, right? These are really hard ideas to talk about with a very white, a very working class, a very non-college educated family that I come from, that's in many ways goes by the book, but the book is always written kind of for white people, right? And if it's hard to kind of talk to family members sometimes when you're trying to say, I had a moment and I was reminded about it on my Facebook page. And I don't post to Facebook much, but I was reminded about it because when the hurricane hit Puerto Rico last year, was it last year, 2 years ago? I can't remember right now. Very prominent politician made fun of the way that people pronounce Puerto Rico, right? And even the mocking of that phrase of a place where someone is saying, if someone says Colombia or Puerto Rico, it's because they're from there and they're saying something in the way that if I were saying my name in Poland, I would say Pałuszek. I wouldn't say Pauszek. So in Poland, I'm going to say Pałuszek because that's how it is. But that mocking comes from a linguistic superiority, right? But it's hard to explain to people, right? So we can get down to politics, right? And everyone hates politics, but when we get down to questions of, okay, well, how is a political opinion or how is a political party influenced with whether it's racism or linguistic ableism or linguistic diversity, or do they appreciate linguistic diversity? Does someone use Spanish in unique ways? When we get down to those questions of language, they seem so subtle and like, oh, that's a small thing. It doesn't make a difference, right? But I think what this class does is it shows us those are the key moments where mocking the way someone says something is tied to questions of identity, it's tied to bodies, it's tied to politics, it's tied to questions of hierarchies and of power, right?
I was having a conversation with another graduate student about this and the difficulties in political disagreement. And I think where we left it is there's a point in which, and I've warned my 1301 students never to say, I'm right, you're bad, like to associate the person of a differing opinion is somehow less than. But there's a line, I think, that politics crosses where it's not a political party or an opinion anymore, but it's a value.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about race and you're talking about access and you're talking about, rhetoric and the subject of rhetoric and composition in large part, it's easy to get caught up in the academic and how should I phrase it, but these are values, I think, and that's that's what makes it difficult to have these conversations, because some people shut down if it's framed in politics, and another group of people are going to shut down if you're questioning their my church taught me this, so this is the right way. So when they're that close, I think it's hard to know, and that's an audience thing. I mean, you would know better than any of us how to phrase it to talk to your family versus how to talk to a 1301 class about it.
Well, and when I talk to my family about it, sometimes I'll say, I just want to talk about this one thing. Like, let's talk about language, right? Because that's what I have a degree in. I have a degree in rhetoric and composition, so let's talk about language, not politics, language. And like build up to, okay, here's why I view this thing in this way, right? But I would say the majority of people in the world do not think about language as tied to ideologies of power, right? We know for a fact from this class that that is the case. We know for a fact that like these questions of which bodies are represented in our textbooks matters. It matters for our students because it shapes what languages we speak in the classroom and what languages we teach and how we shape our curriculum and whose histories are represented in our classes, right? We know that it shapes those things, but it's sometimes hard to explain to people like all those steps. Like we get to that point of, so here, here's all the problems, but it's hard to break it down. So I think that's something that I'm hoping is coming across in this class. I don't necessarily have answers for it, but I think we have starting points and I think we have small steps. What I tried to give you last week was small steps that I can see myself taking, but also I hope that they kind of generate ideas for you all to think, all right, what are those steps, right? So I want to read these two questions from Logan and Lynette and actually kind of end on this question of what steps you can take, and so what you all already discussed. And we'll just do this for the last couple minutes because it's 9:30. I said I was going to get you out early. But so Logan says, okay, so this is in response to Watson and Shapiro article. I'm curious what the constraints are for folks in the class. Excuse me. I know a lot of us are teachers, and I want to know what kinds of rules, policies, course objectives, etc. are in place that would affect the efforts toward the massive shifts Watson and Shapiro advocate. For example, I looked at the newest district syllabus in ENGL 1301 at Tarrant County College, and it explicitly talks about standard English in the course objectives. Use edited American English in academic essays by A, demonstrating proper grammatical constructions, including standard usage and varied sentence structure. B, using accurate mechanics and punctuation. C, demonstrating standard spelling. D, preparing a final copy following format guidelines. I've read the district syllabus a million times, this district syllabus a million times, and it never fully registered what that means. So what about y'all? What are y'all up against? And then Lynette, would you mind writing yours, or do you want someone else to read it?
Sorry, I was having an issue with my headset. Sure, I can read mine. One of the biggest hurdles I see for composition teachers is the constraints placed upon us by outside forces. Administration requires one thing, curriculum directors require another, the community expects something else, and we're stuck in the middle with our students. Even if we want to open up to the idea of multilingual writing in our classroom, for those of us who teach secondary public school, we're blocked in by the STAR exam. Students cannot do anything outside the four corners of the STAR writing assignment, and if they do not use standard academic English or do not understand the rules of standard academic English, they will not pass. And if they do not pass, then they may not graduate. In public education, we live and die by accountability ratings. So then how do we fight for the changes so many of the authors we've read advocate for, recommend, and research supports?
I think these questions really fit well together, but they also prompt us to back to that question that I asked last week of what steps can you all take? So whether you're responding to Logan or Lynette's answer or my general question of what steps, like let's throw some ideas out here. What steps do you think you can take either in these situations or in your own situation if you're not, you know, a secondary school teacher?
I think you can teach standard academic English in a way that is not, doesn't present it as superior or right. And the reason I say that is I had a student who kept following up text evidence with a new sentence that began with the word which, and which made the next sentence a fragment. And a simple change there was moving it to the word this. And, you know, I could have come at it, and I know there are teachers who would have come at it from a standpoint of, you know, what are you doing? But, you know, I kind of gave the gave the comparison. I said the word which is comparable to a tow hook on a car. I said, but the word this does what you want to do, but it does it correctly. And so we made a simple change. That doesn't mean that the word that what he needs to be able to write is morally superior, but if he wants to get where he wants to go, it's a simple shift that he needs to make. And I think a lot of it has to do with presentation by the teacher. If we talk about, okay, this is what you need to do to accomplish a particular job, but, you know, just like when you talk to your friends or you talk to your family, you are talking in ways that meet that context. But, you know, you don't wear a suit at home all the time, but you might wear it to a job. Similarly, we you know, T.S. Eliot said, we prepare a face to meet the faces that we meet. And, you know, the different contexts in which we operate, you know, they're choices. That doesn't mean that one choice is better than the other, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I hear you talking about is more like having students understand the rhetorical choices they're making. Like they could say which, but it won't pass the STAR. So if you use this on the STAR, all right, you're gonna have a better option. But you're not telling that student like that they're a horrible human being because they use the word which, right?
No, and you know, I teach in Dallas now in a school that 97% Hispanic, but I taught before in Frisco, which is a suburb on the north side of Dallas, past Plano, and you know, I taught with people who had the attitude of, you know, if somebody failed, oh well, that person, you know, they live in an apartment, so you know they're not gonna work hard, and their parents aren't going to be supportive. That, you know, that kind of attitude kind of grated on me. But I think if we present different rhetorical, I guess, environments instead of assigning value to them, you can teach towards, you know, passing EOC or passing the AP test, or until they find a way to make the SAT less white, you know, doing what you need to do to get where you want to go, but adopting different rhetorical, shall we say, modes to accomplish different ends. It doesn't make one mode better or worse. It's just a different tool for a different job.
What would it take to dismantle STAR tests?
Oh my God, when somebody figures that out, please let me know.
As far as standardized testing per state, I think that I don't, like, we were talking the other day about, I guess, ripping the syllabus apart.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be kind of a metaphorical way of doing that. Just
Well, the STAR test is like Common Core, right? It's just kind of a rebranding of the similar
Yeah.
concept. So it's a federal mandate.
Yeah.
So it needs to be changed to federal level.
How do we change stuff at the federal level?
Vote.
You gotta vote.
But then again, it would just be reiterated at that point. Like it would just be mandated at a different standard. It would be.
I don't know. I mean, when I was a kid, we were taking, the standardized tests. I remember the Iowas, for crying out loud. I mean, this is a long time. Standardized tests have always been there, but we were never taught how to pass it. We got our score, and that dictated, like, we called them, the track you were in, and if what, like, level of math and what level of English course. If it was tied to funding, it wasn't making a big enough deal for anyone to change their curriculums. So that's a new, like, the emphasis. Standardized testing has always been there. And assessment, we've talked a lot about how do you assess. English, it's difficult. With math, there's a right answer. With English, it gets very complicated on how you score it. So they're always going to be there, but the value we place on them has already been moving.
I think if we take the money out of STAR testing and TSI testing, and if we take the money out of it, if we take the people that are getting profits,
follow the money. Follow the money. That is the answer.
If we do that, then perhaps the stress of all of it will be just, maybe it will go back to that, where we're just figuring out where our students are, and then we can go from there.
It's every standardized test. The GRE is money making.
Yeah,
right
absolutely.
There. And the people
SAT.
who print the tests make the books on how to pass the test.
Yeah.
And
To get rid of ideologies about language and testing, you have to get rid of the incentive of the tests provide to the people giving them. They are money makers. It's all about capitalism. Catherine Prendergast, she's fantastic because her book points to that buying into English is buying into capitalism. But that's what buying into state testing is, right? Like, they're not proven to really do much for the students. I will say personally, I view this as my little, like, yay, I did some good, but it went into the abyss of nothing will ever happen. But I was asked to evaluate STAR tests for a couple years, and I evaluated them, so I had to take the test and comment on, like, what I thought about it. And so I made all these marginal comments. You think I write a lot in your papers? I made marginal comments, and I was like, I tried to say, like, tone it down a little bit, but I was like, this question is geared for native English speakers. If you have a non-native English person taking this test, here's the issue with this. It's going to privilege this person. I was making these comments in the test, and it was actually sent to people who view those comments. Granted, they did nothing about them, but I got paid for doing the work. But I feel like, hey, that's one good thing. Like, maybe eventually, possibly, if enough people saw this as a really problematic test, someone would do something. I'm not naive enough to think that my comments are going to do anything, but I am naive enough to believe that if we try and, if a lot of people try and make this change, I mean, it's not like these tests will go on unless people buy into them, right? Like, you need a Secretary of Education and a president and board members and all these people that say yes to this test, right? If you start changing those people, and you change the people who are on the boards, and you change the people who buy into the test, there's possibilities. It seems demoralizing, but I think something like that's more possible than, ending war or something. And I think it takes two, if someone really wants to advocate for it, there are different ways. Maybe you can't change it as an instructor, but I think, what Robert was telling us, even changing the books you teach or the books that your students read, that's going to do something. I would bet anything that students reading The Hate U Give, as opposed to I don't know. To Kill a Mockingbird? I like the book, but you know, whatever. It's gonna do something. It's gonna inspire them to feel differently, to act differently. I can say one of the things in our first year writing curriculum, we have students read a book called Dreams and Nightmares, and the way students respond to that book is significantly different because they identify with it, or they're like amazed by it, or they're, you know, you have students saying things like, wow, I never thought of the refugee or like the immigrant situation from this personal perspective, because it's a 14-year-old Guatemalan refugee talking about why she fled to the United States and entered illegally. And she talks about that, and we have students here who are saying, I never thought of someone like her. I just viewed it as, oh, those immigrants, right? You know, and so even those little moments, I think are really important. Anyone else? What else did you come up with that you can specifically do in your lives to start this?
I looked at it from the lens of the article I just talked about. It said that if you could take students and have them trace like a Game of Thrones and see what students are doing with it in Australia, in Asia, seeing what they do with it in parts of Europe, and recognize that it's the same source material, but they're learning about a region's impact on it, and they could do something with that.
Yeah.
In theory.
The students that I see, I have a lot of students that learn English in other countries. And I like to make a point whenever they use the Oxford, they don't use, or they use the Oxford comma, when their commas are different, when they make lists, I tell them to ask their professors that which way they prefer to use it. And because at Collin they tend to not include the comma before and. But if you learned English in another country, Africa, and and you learned it alongside French, yes, you're going to not include the comma. Like, so I have a lot of students that and I tell them both ways. Like, this is the way a lot of people in the United States do it. This is the way you do it. Here's the differences. You choose. Just showing them that, giving them that option. As far as syllabi go, the professors that I talk with, I've had discussions with them, so I can like maybe introduce some of the work that I'm reading and influence my students in that way. Maybe next semester I can see a little bit of a change because their curriculum is very
rigid like that. So, Peter, you made me think, right? You go by Peter, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
We see Richard on the screen when we look at, so I have to like change my mindset.
Sorry.
Peter, you made me think that, you know, something like your class and what you're talking about, like, if you can't change the curriculum and you can't change a syllabus necessarily, you know, I personally think, maybe I'm over exaggerating this, but I don't think I am. I think even saying to students, hey, I value, like being transparent with them and saying, in this class, I value all the languages and literacies you bring to this classroom. Maybe we're going to talk about like linguistic diversity and how we each come to this room with different dialects. I'm going to teach you how to succeed on STAR, and you're going to need to use standard English. But I want you to know that I value these things, right? And like draw attention to it and say, like, there's a specific reason I'm teaching you these things, but that doesn't mean I want to dismiss those others, right? Like, I don't see any problem with that. And if anything, I think students would appreciate it and say like, hey, okay, like I think they'd be more apt to kind of open up in those situations. I know I would be, but that's
no, I mean, we talk about all the time. We talk about that all the time. I mean, in AP, We talk about, these are tools for a job, just like any other job that you would have. And, the more you learn as far as this type of job, the more choices you're going to have later. Because, if you go back to the conversation we had at the beginning of class, where you're talking about, okay, we want to write synthesis in a certain way. Well, if you don't know standard academic English to some degree, you can't write a successful synthesis paper. So at some point, that if academia is a path that you want to follow, those are tools that you need. And I tell them, my job is to give you the tools for this job, and if this is a job that you want, then you're going to need to know how to use them. But we also talk about how there are a lot of other paths, besides graduate school for them to follow.
Yeah.
Because many of them, if they go to college and finish, they would be the first in their family to have a college degree, and that's important to them. But a lot of them also, they take the other paths too. So
I think that's a great point about the things that I was telling you earlier. Those are kind of tools to use, right? But we see how Carmen Kennard can say the sentence, hate is gonna hate, in her writing, because she's showing you she can enact the thing that she's trying to dismantle, right? The only reason that works is because she does the standard thing enough to show you, I got this. All right, now let me talk to you, right? You can't do that if a person doesn't understand what you're getting at, first of all, right? So that's why I'm saying is use your personal stories, absolutely. But you got to make sure that I know and your other readers know, whether it's, whoever your audience is, knows why you're giving them a personal story, right? You have to make that connection for them. Otherwise, we can't, no one's going to give you the maybe some people will give the benefit of the doubt, but most people won't give you the benefit of the doubt to read the story if they don't know why you're doing it, right? With Kennard, it's super apparent, and she pulls you right in from the beginning, all right, she's dismantling, standard academic English right here, and she's going to keep going with it. And Asao does that. We haven't read them, but if you want someone else who does that, Rashawn Young absolutely does that. And there's multiple people. So, all right, last thing, next week, class is online. I'm going to send you all classwork on D2L. What it's going to be is I'm going to have a template to get you further thinking about your symposium and your final project. And after you turn this in, and we'll go over this in class, that's when I'll start commenting on it, all right? Right now, your ideas you're still kind of moving them around, you're thinking. Go with whatever idea you want, and then I'll help you after that point to either narrow or be more specific, or if we have to tweak it a bit, then we will. But I'll send you a template for kind of what examples I want and how to do it. But for the most part, and we have 3 readings. One of them's short, it's an introduction. The other one is Dingo's piece and Hesford's piece. Dingo Queen and Hesford and Shell's article. So read them. We have a couple online presentations next week. And then the following week, I'm sure you'll be thrilled to know we will only have 2 readings. And we'll spend some of the class going over final project ideas. And then we have, I think, one more day. Well, we have 2 more days that I don't have readings for. One day, what I've thought about, and I'm going to keep thinking about it, but I think I'm going to actually share my research project with you all and read an example so that, excuse me, I feel like I missed these. Maybe not. I'm going to share, I think, a transnational project and talk through some transnational texts and have you read community writing. So that way you get to see how people outside of academia enact what we're talking about. And then the other week, I think when we come back from the break, I'm going to get my conference. I want to get your opinion on what kind of topics you're interested in, and I'll pull some readings based on what you all kind of like. You know, if there's a topic that you want to read more of, or if there's an article that stands out to you. So yeah, so that's all I have for today. So like I said, no class next week, but be on the lookout. Conference on Community Writing, Philadelphia.
Dr. Carter too, right?
Yep. Be on the lookout. I'll email you before Wednesday, so I'll give you some extra time. I'll probably email you this weekend, so you have extra time if you don't want to, you know, wait till next week to do the work. Okay?